In this video, I will be ranking the 10 most hyped draft prospects in NFL history. I'm sure that everybody will agree with my rankings, and all the comments and everything will be cordial, and everybody will love each other and maybe kiss if you're into that sort of thing. The video begins right after this short break. As most of you all know, I'm a gigantic Philadelphia Eagles fan, and not to brag, we're kind of a big deal. How can I find tickets for an Eagles home game easier than ever before? Well, that's where SeatGeek comes into play. They're the sponsor of today's video, and I want to give them a huge shout out. Sure, it's the NFL offseason, and the Eagles aren't playing right now, but SeatGeek doesn't have an offseason. With over 35 million downloads, SeatGeek is the #1 rated ticketing app around. As you can see, there are more than 70,000 events listed on SeatGeek, and it's not just sports. You have concerts, festivals, and more. Right now, Major League Baseball is in full swing. The NBA and the NHL playoffs are in full swing. And you can also get World Cup tickets on SeatGeek. I love using SeatGeek. I've used it to go to Eagles home games before. The experience each time is great, especially if you're playing a division rival. The atmosphere, the camaraderie that you feel, especially when your team is scoring a lot of touchdowns, there's nothing like it. And remember, SeatGeek has your back. Each ticket is rated on a scale from 1 to 10, so you know you're getting a good deal. Look for the green dots. Green means good, red means bad. Plus, every ticket is backed by SeatGeek's buyer guarantee. And of course, I came through for you guys. You can use code BARRY10 for 10% off your next set of tickets at SeatGeek. That's 10% off any tickets with promo code BARRY10. Don't forget to click the link in the description to download the app and have the code automatically added to your account so you can use it later. Thank you, SeatGeek. Number 10, Brian Bosworth, aka The Boz. Nowadays, Bosworth is an occasional actor and mostly known for his failed NFL career that was shortened due to shoulder injuries, but there's a reason why, beyond his hair and his flamboyant personality alter ego, The Boz, that he was getting so much attention when he was coming out of Oklahoma in 1987. It's because he really was that fucking good at college. When he was at Oklahoma, he established himself as one of the greatest college football players of all time. He was a 3-time first-team all-conference member. He was a 2-time Defensive Player of the Year for his conference, and he was a 3-time All-American, twice being unanimous first team, and he also won the Dick Butkus Award twice in 85 and 86 while having a national championship on top of that. He's in the College Football Hall of Fame, and he was a cultural phenomenon for a couple years before his shoulders gave out on him and he had a short NFL career. But he didn't bust out in the NFL because he didn't have talent. It was injury. Much like the next guy on this list, who also has a connection to Boz. Number 9, Bo Jackson. Everybody knows who Bo Jackson is, even if you were born 30 years after he last played an athletic event. And here we sit in 2026, almost 36 years since he last played a down professional football. In terms of pure athletic ability, Bo Jackson might be the best athlete of all time, and the film certainly backs that up. I mean, look at some of these runs. Holy fucking shit. His top end speed was ridiculous. He didn't really have necessarily a lot of wiggle or juke to him, but he kind of didn't need it because he just was so big and fast, it didn't matter. You're not going to ask Shaq to shoot 3-pointers in order to be dominant, right? Anyway, we all know Jackson was a multi-two-sport star at Auburn in baseball and football, but let's just go over his college exploits a little bit. He was a 3-time first-team All-SEC. He was a consensus All-American in 1983, and then a unanimous All-American in 1985, which was the same year he won the Heisman Trophy. The Tampa Bay Buccaneers had the first overall pick in the 86 draft, and Jackson told them to fuck off because they basically ruined his remaining eligibility in baseball, and yet they still drafted him first anyway, and he decided not to play for them, and then he spent a year in the minors in baseball, and then he went and played with the Raiders for a couple years part-time before we all know how his career ended. But in terms of as a prospect, there have been very few more hyped up running back prospects than Bo Jackson, and on a pure talent perspective, it's not hard to see why. Number 8, Calvin Johnson. Calvin Johnson was a scout's wet dream in terms of his height, his speed, size, hands, everything. The expectations for Calvin going into the NFL were essentially he needs to be a first ballot Hall of Famer in order to justify the hype he had, and that's exactly what happened. Although his NFL career wasn't quite as long as many thought, he still was a deserved first ballot Hall of Famer and is considered by many to be a top 5 receiver of all time. But this is not about his NFL career. This is about what he did at Georgia Tech. He won numerous awards. He was a 3-time first-team All-Conference. He was the ACC Rookie of the Year. He was the ACC Player of the Year. He was a unanimous All-American. He won a bunch of receiver best receiver awards, and they were all deserved. He made Reggie Ball, who might be the worst four-year starter in college football history, look somewhat decent at times with the jump balls, as you can see in these clips. At the end of the day, Calvin Johnson is the rare prospect that was super hyped up because of all of his physical gifts, and he ended up living up to it. I'm sure the Raiders, in retrospect, would love to have chosen Calvin Johnson over Joe Walrus Russell if they had a do-over. Or maybe not. They're the Raiders, so you never know. Number 7, Jadeveon Clowney. This might be a little bit of a weird selection, but all I can remember, and I've talked about this before, is Jadeveon Clowney's high school film is the most comically dominant film I've ever seen for a football player. And I saw this before he got to South Carolina, and he was the highest recruited player in the country. He was supposed to be a superstar, and then he came out and he was a very, very good to great player at South Carolina, and then he went on to become the first overall pick for the Houston Texans in 2014. But anybody who remembers the Clowney hype in 2014 knows that I'm really not exaggerating here, particularly because of his famous hit against Michigan in the Outback Bowl, where he got like a fumble recovery in the same play. It's one of the greatest individual plays ever. But Clowney was essentially the golden boy prospect who came in and had a somewhat disappointing junior season before going on to have a somewhat disappointing NFL career. But the hype around this guy was absolutely ridiculous. And the fact that he's had, by all accounts, a respectable NFL career, and that's considered to be disappointing, really tells you how high the expectations were for him going into the NFL. And there's a reason for that because of all his measurables and the highlights that he had at South Carolina. Number 6, Trevor Lawrence. Some might say this is recency bias, and I'm going to say, how about you suck my balls? Because this is not recency bias. Trevor Lawrence, for those, I say you're too young to remember, but this shit only happened like 8 years ago, so if you're too young to remember that, then you probably shouldn't be on the computer right now. Lawrence was the most hyped QB recruit in the country. He came in as a true freshman, and he won a national championship with Clemson. This was in 2018, by the way, and everybody said, hey, Lawrence should basically take the next 2 years off because whenever he becomes draft eligible, he's going to be the first overall pick. And that's exactly what happened. He never did win a Heisman Trophy with Clemson. He never won another national championship after his freshman year. And to be completely honest, I felt he was maybe a touch overrated as a college quarterback, but I could still see a lot of the reason why he was praised. Anybody could with his 6'6" frame. He was a good athlete, had a really strong arm. And yes, his NFL career has been, let's just say, uneven. But this guy was basically, you got to tank for this guy multiple years ahead of time because he's going to be that good of a quarterback. And although he probably will never live up to that standard, when it comes to the most high prospects ever, this is a guy that was basically predetermined to be a superstar before he ever played a down of college football. Number 5, Reggie Bush. A lot of you youngins nowadays don't really remember the hype around Reggie Bush at USC. Seriously, the hype for this guy coming out of USC was that he's going to be the greatest running back of all time. I'm not kidding. If you were around back in 2005, 2006, you'll know that I'm not joking about this. And when you look at his highlights from when he was at USC, when he won the Heisman Trophy and the national championship, just the general amazing shit he was doing on a daily basis there, the hype seemed pretty warranted. In fact, in 2006, when the Houston Texans announced they were going to draft Mario Williams over Reggie with the first overall pick, it was basically a national scandal. How could you pass up Reggie Bush? He's a sure thing. And, well, it turns out he really wasn't a sure thing. Sure, he had a respectable NFL career, he won a Super Bowl with the Saints, but he never came close to living up to the hype, becoming the next greatest running back of all time, which was the company he was put in coming out of USC. He's going to be the next Gale Sayers, he's going to be similar to Barry Sanders. He never came close to that in the pros, but when you're looking at them just as a prospect, it's hard to not fall for the hype for this guy because his college film truly is ridiculous. If social media was around when he was at USC, he would have gone viral 5 times a week. Number 4, Peyton Manning. There's been somewhat of a revisionist history with Peyton Manning as a prospect. There are some people that say, well, he wasn't even the clear-cut number 1 prospect because it was between him and Ryan Leaf, and Leaf was seen as the high upside guy, and Manning was seen as the safe pick. But I'm going to call BS on that because Peyton was the highest rated recruit in the country coming out of high school. He was the Gatorade National Player of the Year. He started since he was a freshman at Tennessee. He put up insane numbers. He was basically a favorite to win the Heisman Trophy his entire senior year, and then he ended up getting surprised and upset by Charles Woodson in that regard. But more so, if Peyton had come out of the draft a year earlier in 97, he would have been the first overall pick. But one of the biggest reasons he didn't come out of the draft a year early is because he didn't want to be picked by the New York Jets. That's a true story. Go look it up. So, although I do believe there were some people in the Ryan Leaf camp coming out, Peyton Manning was about as decorated of a prospect as you could possibly get for the quarterback position. And it's safe to say that Peyton lived up to the hype in the pros. Number 3, Tony Mandarich. You've probably heard of Tony Mandarich, and for all the wrong reasons. He was hyped up, literally, as you can see here, as as the greatest offensive line prospect ever when he was at Michigan State. He certainly looked the part, at least coming out of college when he was on steroids, which turned out to be a large reason for his success at Michigan State. But he was still a great player at Michigan State, regardless of how terrible his pro career went. He was a unanimous All-American in 1988. He was two-time first-team All-Big Ten, and he was a two-time Big Ten Offensive Lineman of the Year. The one thing I'll say is, even looking at a lot of his clips when he was at Michigan State, there were signs that he might be overhyped beyond just the ridiculous testing numbers he put up leading up to draft. One of the big things is although he was certainly very good, his feet weren't particularly anything special relative to the other All-Pros or the Hall of Fame offensive linemen when you watch their film. Basically, and this might be hindsight bias, but even in college, some of his clips he looks a little bit limited, and that ended up being his biggest downfall, besides the fact that he stopped using steroids and they became a lot weaker and smaller and he got his ass kicked, was the fact that he had no feet in the NFL. And if you know offensive line play, even just a little bit, you know that being light on your feet is crucial. So while he had some decent highlights, without the steroids to help boost him up, he became the NFL's incredible bust, and he was a second overall pick in 1989, and he was the only pick in the top 5 of that draft to not be a Hall of Famer. Number 2, John Elway. All the old heads are pissing and shitting and vomiting with rage. How can you have John Elway number 2 and not number 1? He's literally the prospect, the greatest prospect of all time. He literally held teams hostage in 1983 in terms of, I want to go play baseball for the Yankees, and he told the Colts not to draft him, and they still drafted him anyway. We all know the story if you follow football. And yes, Elway certainly was an incredible prospect, and yes, he is one of the greatest draft prospects of all time, and maybe he is the consensus greatest prospect of all time. I do think some of that is nostalgia a bit, because physically, although he was certainly a very talented quarterback physically, he was 6'3", 220-ish pounds, wasn't super athletic in terms of jumping ability. He could certainly scramble, and we all know his arm strength, but a guy like Josh Allen completely mogs him physically. So to say he's the most physically gifted quarterback prospect ever, I just don't agree with that. I think that's a lot of hindsight. But still, his tape at Stanford was really incredible, and you can absolutely see why he was the most high prospect of his time. And as we all know, he did go on to have a Hall of Fame career, but Elway is the ultimate litmus test, and you can basically tell how old somebody is by what their opinion of John Elway is. If you're a younger person and you're in the stats era, you probably think he's overrated because his overall numbers in the pros weren't that great, but every single old head who watched him play, they all swear by John Elway, and I get it. But much like he did in the 1980s with the Denver Broncos 3 times in the Super Bowl, Elway comes in second place because the number 1 most hyped draft prospect in NFL history, you probably guessed it, is Andrew Luck. It was literally a toss-up for me between Luck and Elway at the number 1 spot, but the reason I went with Andrew Luck is not just because of the social media element. It's the fact that the Indianapolis Colts were willing to give up on Peyton Manning to draft him. That's right. And I know it's easy to say, oh, well, Peyton Manning, he had neck problems at the time, so they were just taking their due diligence, blah, blah, blah. The fact is Andrew Luck was such a sure thing that the Colts told one of the greatest quarterbacks of all time, get the fuck out of here, we're taking this guy, and nobody questioned it. Even if that quarterback, like Peyton at the time, was coming off of neck surgery, okay, the fact to say, hey, we're going to take this guy, we're going to replace you with this guy, and everybody will understand. That's amazing to me. And the fact is I lived through this in real time, and I can remember as far back as 2009, people were starting to talk about Andrew Luck as being a future first overall pick when he was at Stanford during his freshman year, and then the hype really picked up in 2010, and we all remember Cam Newton's legendary season in 2010 when he won the championship and Heisman Trophy, and he became the first overall pick in 2011. Yeah, well, guess what? Andrew Luck would have been the first overall pick if he had come out in 2011. He might have been the first overall pick had he come out in 2010 if he was allowed to. So yeah, it was no surprise that when he was finally draft eligible in 2012, he was first overall. His talent and his ability was not overrated. I can tell you that as somebody who experienced the entire ride of Andrew Luck from Stanford to the Colts.